The silence in my expansive penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline was deafening. I sat trapped in my specialized medical wheelchair, my body feeling like it was constructed of lead and broken glass. Every single joint ached with a deep, piercing agony that had become my constant, unyielding companion over the past 3 months. My hands trembled as they rested on the thin cashmere blanket covering my lap. Just 72 hours ago, I had received a diagnosis that tore my world apart. Late-stage aggressive leukemia, the grim-faced doctors had told me, a death sentence handed down in a sterile hospital room while the man I loved held my hand and wept openly. But the tears my husband shed in that clinic were nothing but a calculated, masterful performance. Right now, in the quiet of our home, there were no tears. There was only the harsh metallic sound of a zipper closing. Julian, my husband of 4 years, the man whose political consulting firm I had funded in full, with my own hard-earned wealth, was standing in our master bedroom, rapidly shoving his custom-tailored Italian suits into a designer duffel bag. He moved with a cold, frantic energy, refusing to make eye contact with me. I watched him from the marble hallway, my breathing shallow, my heart pounding erratically against my bruised ribs. I wanted to scream, I wanted to demand a rational explanation, but the extreme unyielding fatigue that had been steadily ravaging my failing body left me mute. I could only stare in paralyzed disbelief as the beautiful life I had built piece by piece was dismantled right in front of my tired eyes. Standing beside him, looking unbothered, was Senator Eleanor Vance. She adjusted the vibrant silk scarf, draped elegantly around her neck. It was a vintage designer scarf I had personally sourced and bought for her as a campaign victory gift. A pathetic, desperate attempt to buy the approval of a powerful woman who had despised me from the moment we first met. Eleanor had always carried herself with the haughty arrogance of political royalty, looking down her aristocratic nose at anyone who did not meet her hypocritical standards of wealth and pedigree. Today she wore her ruthless judgment like a golden crown. She smoothed the expensive fabric, turned her cold, piercing eyes toward my wheelchair, and let out a sharp, dismissive sigh. "We are not wasting our precious time on someone who is about to expire," Eleanor said, her refined voice dripping with toxic venom. "My son needs space to grieve and heal in peace. He has a brilliant political future ahead of him. Serena, you cannot expect a handsome, vibrant man destined for the governor's mansion to spend his prime years changing bedpans and watching his wife wither away into nothing. The political landscape waits for no one, and it is time for Julian to step out of this depressing darkness and into the bright light." Her ruthless words hit me with the crushing force of a physical blow. The cruelty of her statement, delivered in my own hallway, under the luxury roof my money had paid for, was staggering. I looked at Julian, hoping he would defend me, hoping the man who had promised to love me through sickness and health would silence his mother. Instead, he simply hoisted the heavy leather duffel bag onto his broad shoulder. He walked past me, close enough that I could smell his expensive signature cologne. He did not say a single word of comfort. He did not offer a final gentle embrace. He simply reached into my open designer purse resting on the console table, pulled out my primary black corporate credit card, and slid it into his tailored pocket. "Thanks for understanding, Serena," Julian muttered, his voice devoid of any genuine emotion. "I will have my executive assistant reach out to coordinate the rest of my things. Take care of yourself." With that cold dismissal, they walked out the heavy front door. The solid oak door clicked shut behind them, sealing me inside a quiet, expensive tomb of my own making. I heard the powerful engine of his luxury vehicle, a vehicle legally registered in my company's name, roar to life. I listened as the tires squealed against the pavement, fading away until there was nothing left but suffocating silence. I was alone. I was 33 years old, successful beyond measure in the cutthroat world of high-frequency trading, yet bankrupt in my personal life. I had played the role of the strong, supportive corporate wife to perfection, carrying the heavy weight of my husband and his ambitious family on my back, paying their campaign debts, funding their lavish lifestyles, and ignoring the glaring red flags because I foolishly believed that family required sacrifice. Now my reward was a terminal diagnosis and an empty penthouse. 10 minutes later, the sharp ringing of my encrypted cell phone shattered the heavy quiet. The sudden shrill noise made me physically jump, sending a painful shockwave through my fragile nervous system. I stared at the caller identification screen illuminating the dark console table. It was Dr. Eris, my lead physician from the private oncology center. My hands shook as I wheeled myself forward and managed to grasp the device. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. I fully expected a follow-up call about hospice care or scheduling palliative treatments. I expected professional pity. "Serena, are you in a safe place right now?" Dr. Eris asked immediately. Her voice was not calm or soothing, it was tight, urgent, and laced with an unmistakable tremor of panic. "I am home," I whispered, my voice raspy and weak. "I am alone, my husband just left me." "Listen to me carefully, Serena," Dr. Eris said, her words rushing out in an intense stream. "I need you to stay where you are, and do not consume anything in that house. Do not drink the bottled water, do not take your daily vitamin infusions. Do you understand me?" I frowned, deep confusion cutting through the heavy fog of my clinical depression. "Dr. Eris, what is going on? Have my lab results changed? The secondary biopsy and advanced toxicology panels just came back from the specialized laboratory in Switzerland," she explained, taking a deep breath that sounded loud over the receiver. "Serena, you do not have late-stage leukemia, you do not have cancer at all." The shocking words hung in the quiet air, refusing to compute in my exhausted brain. "What do you mean I do not have cancer?" "I saw the scans. You showed me the cellular degradation. They are not malignant cancer cells, Serena. They are severe internal lesions and cellular necrosis caused by acute heavy metal toxicity." Dr. Eris's voice dropped to a horrifyingly serious register. "Your blood is testing positive for lethal levels of a synthetic thallium derivative and arsenic. The levels are staggering. They are nearly 40 times the maximum survivable limit. The extreme fatigue, the rapid hair loss, the lesions, the joint failure, these are textbook symptoms of systemic prolonged chemical poisoning. Serena, someone is trying to murder you." The expensive phone nearly slipped from my trembling fingers. Poisoned. The terrifying word echoed in my mind, ringing loud and clear like a warning siren. I was not dying of a random tragic disease, I was being actively murdered, but who would want to kill me? The answer arrived before the question fully formed, blooming in my chest with terrifying icy clarity. "There is something else you urgently need to know, Doctor." Eris continued, her voice pulling me back from the dangerous edge of shock. 10 minutes ago, right before I called you, my office administration received an urgent inquiry from your husband. Julian called to request your official certified diagnostic records. He told my staff he needed them immediately to file a claim with your corporate life insurance provider. He was specifically inquiring about the criteria for triggering the $20 million accelerated death benefit on your critical illness policy. He wanted to know how fast the funds could be released once the medical paperwork was submitted. A cold, sharp realization pierced through the heavy mental fog in my brain, freezing my tears instantly. The puzzle pieces clicked together with devastating mathematical precision. Julian, my charming politically ambitious husband, who had suddenly taken a keen interest in my health over the past 6 months. Julian, who had insisted on hiring a private holistic nurse to administer my daily high-end vitamin infusions to reduce my stress. Julian, who would stand there watching the IV drip every single morning before I logged into my trading terminals, smiling his perfect, loving political smile, telling me how much he wanted me to stay healthy and vibrant for his upcoming campaign. Those IV bags were not boosting my immunity, they were laced with synthetic thallium and arsenic. He had been meticulously, patiently feeding me lethal poison directly into my veins, calculating the exact dosage to mimic a natural rapid terminal decline. He wanted the control of my high-frequency trading firm, the $20 million life insurance payout, and the freedom to walk away, without the messy public complications of a high-profile divorce that would ruin his mother's political campaign. He and Eleanor had stood in my hallway, mocking my impending death, knowing why my body was failing. Eleanor knew. The way she had smiled when she told me I was not taking my wealth to the grave proved it. They were complicit in my calculated execution. The profound, deep sorrow that had weighed me down just minutes prior vanished. It evaporated, instantly replaced by a surge of unadulterated adrenaline. The deep ache in my failing joints faded into the background, eclipsed by a burning, incandescent rage. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had secured their political dynasty's generational wealth by burying the strong woman who had funded their existence. They thought I was going to quietly fade away in this expensive wheelchair while they spent my millions on television ads and campaign galas. They miscalculated, Dr. Eris, I said, my voice no longer a fragile whisper but a solid, terrifying command. I need you to prescribe the counteragents immediately. Tell me what I need to do to survive this. I am sending a trusted private covert nurse to your penthouse right now. Dr. Eris replied, matching my sudden intensity. She will bring the necessary medical equipment for intensive chelation therapy to flush the heavy metals from your bloodstream. This must be kept strictly off the official hospital records. If whoever did this realizes you know the truth, your life is in immediate physical danger. Send her, I ordered, and Dr. Eris, thank you. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the plush sofa. I looked down at my trembling hands, clenching them into tight fists until the knuckles turned stark white. The game had just changed. Julian and his hypocritical, blood-sucking political family had orchestrated a masterpiece of deception, but they had left me breathing just long enough to discover the terrifying truth. I was going to cleanse my poisoned blood, rebuild my strength, and execute a flawless plan that would leave them begging for the mercy they had ruthlessly denied me. Less than an hour after Dr. Eris hung up the phone, a discreet black sedan pulled into the private underground parking garage of my building. A woman in dark unbranded medical scrubs stepped out of the private elevator carrying two heavy silver medical cases. She introduced herself simply as Nurse Clara. There were no pleasantries, no sympathetic glances, and no wasted movements. She operated with military precision, reflecting the extreme urgency of my dire situation. Within a matter of minutes, she had my immaculate living room transformed into a covert medical bay. She hooked a thick intravenous line directly into my arm, pumping a specialized chelating agent straight into my bloodstream. The chemical reaction was instantaneous and agonizingly painful. It felt like liquid fire racing through my veins, searching out the heavy metals that Julian had so meticulously deposited into my vulnerable body. Every single nerve ending in my body screamed in protest, but I refused to cry out. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted fresh copper blood. Tears were a foolish luxury I could no longer afford. Survival mode had fully activated within me, shutting down the grieving, heartbroken wife and awakening the ruthless. Calculating CEO Clara worked in silence, monitoring my fluctuating vitals while the lethal toxins were slowly and painfully drawn from my damaged tissues. Dr. Eris had been right. If Julian or his wicked mother Eleanor got even a slight hint that I was receiving medical treatment, my life would be in immediate physical jeopardy. I had to remain the dying, helpless, pathetic woman they confidently left behind. The physical purging process was excruciatingly brutal, but it effectively cleared the thick mental fog that had kept me docile and confused for the last 6 months. My mind, usually sharp enough to run a multi-million-dollar high-frequency trading empire, began firing on all cylinders once again. I needed a legal mercenary, a vicious fraud attorney who could quietly and systematically dismantle Julian's political infrastructure before he even realized what was happening. Ignoring the intense throbbing in my muscles, I wheeled myself over to my home office desk, dragging the heavy intravenous pole right alongside me. I booted up my encrypted corporate laptop. My fingers flew rapidly across the familiar keyboard, typing the specific URL for my secure corporate banking portal. My primary firm, Zenith Trading Capital, held hundreds of millions in operational capital. I navigated straight to the priority wire transfer screen, fully ready to authorize a unquestionable retainer to the most ruthless divorce and corporate fraud attorney in the city of New York. I entered my secure master credentials. I typed in my complex secondary authenticator code. The screen loaded for a brief second before flashing a bright glaring red banner. Access denied, account locked. Please contact your financial administrator. I stared at the glowing screen, my heart skipping a painful beat. I hit the refresh button. I typed the complex password again. Access denied. The bold red text burned into my vision, mocking my desperate attempt at retaliation. It was not just a random technical glitch, it was a deliberate, hostile takeover. A sickening wave of realization washed over my body. As that red banner flashed incessantly, the injustice of my current situation crashed down upon me like a heavy steel anvil. I had built this trading empire from scratch. A decade ago, I was a brilliant but struggling mathematics prodigy with a full academic scholarship. I had a clear path to success. Then I met Julian. He was struggling terribly, failing to launch his political consulting firm, drowning in insurmountable debt. But he possessed an undeniable magnetic charm that masked his underlying incompetence. I voluntarily sidelined my own prestigious academic research to work grueling 18-hour shifts, coding complex trading algorithms by night while working at a cutthroat hedge fund by day. I sacrificed my youth, my precious sleep, and my overall peace of mind to build a thriving proprietary firm that could fully fund his expensive political ambitions. I paid for his custom designer suits, his luxury car leases, and the ridiculous overpriced fundraising galas he claimed he needed to network with the elite. Now the immense wealth I had built with my own literal blood, sweat, and tears was being held hostage by the parasites who fed on it. They had taken everything I willingly gave, and now they were forcefully taking the rest. I snatched my cell phone from the desk and immediately dialed Marcus, my dedicated private banker, who personally handled my top-tier corporate accounts. The line rang 3 agonizingly long times before he finally answered, his voice tight and overly formal. "Serena, I am so glad you called. I have been trying to reach your corporate office all morning." "Marcus," I said, my voice cold, sharp, and dripping with authoritative command. "Why am I locked out of my own corporate accounts? I need a substantial wire transfer processed immediately." There was a heavy, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. "Serena, I cannot authorize any transfers whatsoever. Your corporate accounts, as well as your joint personal accounts with Julian, have been frozen." "Frozen by whose authority?" I demanded, my knuckles turning white as my grip tightened on the phone. "By the authority of your own internal accounting department," Marcus replied, his tone apologetic but rigidly firm. "We received an urgent, critical fraud alert early this morning. Your chief financial officer flagged a rapid series of suspicious offshore transfers initiated directly from your master credentials. Millions of dollars have been systematically moving into untraceable anonymous shell accounts in the Cayman Islands over the last 48 hours. Due to the suspicious activity and the sheer unprecedented volume of capital leaving the domestic accounts, your CFO requested an immediate comprehensive freeze to prevent any further hemorrhaging of company assets." The bank had no choice but to fully comply with the strict federal regulations regarding suspected corporate embezzlement. My breath caught in my throat as the devastating reality settled into my bones. My chief financial officer was Arthur Julian's older cousin. He was the exact same cousin I had graciously hired to manage my sensitive corporate books, out of a misguided sense of intense family obligation, when he lost his previous corporate job under questionable circumstances. I had generously given Arthur a lucrative 6-figure salary and granted him unparalleled, unrestricted access to my secure financial infrastructure simply because Eleanor had tearfully begged me to keep the growing wealth strictly in the family. They had weaponized my selfless generosity, They had used my unconditional trust as a deadly weapon to destroy me. Julian was not just trying to quietly cash in on my lucrative life insurance policy. The ruthless family was actively orchestrating a coordinated financial heist right under my nose. They were deliberately framing me for maliciously embezzling my own hard-earned money, transferring it offshore to secret corporate accounts they undoubtedly controlled. They were systematically locking me out of my own successful company so I could not effectively defend myself or hire competent legal counsel. They had carefully anticipated my every single potential move, strategically cutting off my vast financial resources while patiently waiting for the heavy metals to finally stop my beating heart. The multifaceted betrayal was so profoundly deep, so calculated and vicious, it briefly took my breath away. But the rising wave of panic quickly dissolved into a chilling lethal focus that sharpened my vision. I thanked Marcus abruptly, offered no further explanation, and hung up the phone. I looked down at the dark, sludgy liquid, moving steadily through the clear medical tubing into my aching arm, actively pulling Julian's toxic poison from my recovering veins. They had frozen my corporate accounts. They had deceitfully stolen my money. They had cowardly tried to take my life. But they made one fatal, irreversible error. They underestimated the resilient, brilliant architect of the empire. I was no longer a helpless victim. I was a survivor preparing to obliterate every person who had conspired to end my beautiful life. The physical pain of the heavy metals leaving my body was overshadowed by the searing agony of this ultimate betrayal. I had hired Arthur because Eleanor begged me to save her eldest nephew from financial ruin. I gave him respect, a corner office overlooking Wall Street, and a staggering executive salary. I invited him into my home for Sunday dinners. I trusted him implicitly because he was family. He repaid that monumental generosity by constructing an automated digital pipeline that funneled my hard-earned proprietary trading profits straight into phantom political entities. Arthur had brilliantly exploited the sheer overwhelming volume of our daily algorithmic trades. When your high-frequency firm processes millions of microtransactions a second, it becomes easy to slip in a few dozen fake invoices for ghost server maintenance or synthetic data feeds. A $10,000 data fee here, a $25,000 server storage fee there. Arthur enthusiastically approved every single one of them with his digital signature. I watched the stolen numbers tally up at the bottom of my secure backdoor screen. Over the course of 36 months, my trusted cousin-in-law had embezzled just over $12 million. $12 million stolen directly from a successful business that I had built from nothing. The sheer unprecedented scale of the theft was breathtaking, but I needed to know where my money was going. I opened a secondary terminal window and initiated an aggressive cyber trace on the routing numbers associated with the dummy shell companies. I traced the digital footprints across multiple state lines, actively tracking the IP addresses Arthur used to register the limited liability companies. My backdoor administrative access allowed me to peer straight through the complex corporate veils he had so carefully constructed. The funds did not sit in those offshore Cayman accounts for long. They were rapidly cycled back into the domestic economy through a sophisticated political laundering process. The funds were being washed clean and funneled directly into a expanding network of untraceable super PACs and dark money campaign funds right here in New York. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I pulled the public campaign finance filings linked to the laundered funds. As the high-resolution documents loaded onto my screen, a bitter, humorless laugh escaped my cracked lips. Every single dark money organization, from sprawling grassroots initiative fronts to multi-million-dollar television ad buys across the state, was legally tied to one single political candidate. Eleanor Vance, my mother-in-law, the aristocratic, holier-than-thou senator who was currently gearing up for a ruthless, expensive gubernatorial campaign. She was now one of the most funded political candidates in the state, and she had fueled her sprawling political empire with money stolen directly from my company. The complex pieces of their sinister conspiracy snapped together with chilling clarity. Julian, Arthur, and Eleanor were not just greedy opportunists. They were exceptionally patient, calculating political predators who operated with a terrifying level of ruthless coordination. They realized early on that my high-frequency trading company was generating amounts of capital. Instead of supporting me in building our wealth together as a married couple, they hatched a comprehensive plan to slowly drain my vast resources to fund a political dynasty, while simultaneously plotting my physical demise. They assumed that my rapidly worsening health, the extreme fatigue, and the failing joints caused by the daily doses of arsenic and synthetic thallium would prevent me from ever conducting a thorough technical audit of my own complex books. They banked on the fact that I would be too weak, too exhausted, and too distracted by my impending death to ever notice the millions of dollars hemorrhaging from corporate accounts. Their elite arrogance was staggering. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect, undetectable crime against a dying woman. They assumed I would quietly pass away in my wheelchair, leaving them to inherit my immense empire and dominate the political landscape forever. Once I was dead, Arthur would be in the perfect position as chief financial officer to cover their digital tracks and bury the financial discrepancies forever. Meanwhile, Julian would walk away a grieving, politically sympathetic widower with a $12 million dark money war chest and a $20 million accelerated life insurance payout. They had weaponized my love, my trust, and my desperate desire to support my powerful new family, turning my success into the instrument of my execution. I sat back in my wheelchair, the glow of the laptop screen casting long shadows across my home office. The intravenous machine hummed quietly beside me, a steady, soothing rhythm that matched the newfound sharp clarity settling over my mind. I had willingly sacrificed my own academic research to lift Julian up. I had worked grueling 18-hour shifts to ensure he never had to worry about a single campaign bill. I had hired his disgraced cousin to preserve their aristocratic family dignity. I had given them everything I had, and their gratitude was a slow, agonizing murder. But as I stared at the irrefutable, hard evidence of their staggering political fraud, the lingering remnants of my despair evaporated. The emotional manipulation they had used to control me shattered into a million useless pieces. They thought they had trapped me in a frozen financial cage, but they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I was not just a wealthy political wife they could easily discard. I was the supreme architect of the systems they were trying to use against me. I had built the digital walls they were hiding behind, and I knew how to tear them down. I reached out and gently touched the medical tubing connected to my bruised arm. The chelation therapy was working. I could feel a subtle shift in my body, a tiny spark of electrical energy returning to my depleted muscles. My joints were still stiff, but the overwhelming paralyzing weakness was slowly beginning to recede. Survival was no longer just a desperate hope, it was a mathematical certainty, and with survival came the demand for ruthless, uncompromising justice. I pulled up a secure encrypted text editor on my screen and began compiling a meticulous dossier of every single fraudulent transaction. I captured high-resolution screenshots of Arthur's unauthorized offshore wire transfers, downloaded the IP logs proving he originated the dummy campaign accounts, and saved the digital financial ledgers linking the stolen funds directly to Eleanor's gubernatorial super PACs. I was building an ironclad arsenal of evidence that no high-priced defense attorney could ever dismantle. Every keystroke was a silent promise of the destruction I was about to unleash upon them. But I knew I could not simply march into the local police station and hand over a flash drive. If I revealed that I was alive, actively detoxing and fully aware of their scheme, Julian and Eleanor would instantly panic. A panicked political predator is unpredictable and dangerous. He might try to finish the job directly, or worse, he and Arthur might instantly liquidate the campaign funds and flee the country with my millions before the federal authorities could freeze their personal assets. To trap them, to ensure their ruin on a public stage, I had to play their sick game better than they did. I had to give them what they wanted. They wanted Serena, the successful CEO, to die. They wanted the strong woman, who had funded their lavish political lifestyles, to quietly disappear into the night, so they could celebrate their newly stolen wealth and electoral victory. I looked at the security camera feeds, monitoring the perimeter of my penthouse, ensuring I was still alone. A cold, dangerous smile spread across my face. I was going to give them their ultimate wish. I was going to die. I was going to become a ghost, a silent, invisible force operating from the shadows, unbound by the rules of the living. And from that grave, I would reach up and drag them straight down to hell. I picked up the telephone and quickly dialed Dr. Eris's private cell number. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anticipation. I clearly laid out my realization. I clearly explained the financial freeze, Arthur's embezzlement, and Eleanor's dark money campaign funds. I told her that my husband and his family were not just waiting for me to die. They had constructed an elaborate financial trap that required my death to execute fully. If I confronted them now, or if I simply vanished, they would immediately liquidate the stolen assets and vanish into the political wind. I needed them to stay where they were, paralyzed by their own greed, waiting for the final insurance payout that would never come. I needed to become a ghost, an entity incapable of interfering with their grand design. Dr. Eris understood me instantly. She knew the medical system inside and out, and she knew how to manipulate it to our advantage. We engineered a coordinated catastrophic health crash. Within 2 hours, a private discreet ambulance arrived at the service entrance of my luxury building. Nurse Clara expertly prepped me, lowering my blood pressure with safe but effective medications, making me appear pale, clammy, and unresponsive. The parasitized, carefully vetted and bound by strict non-disclosure agreements arranged by Dr. Eris, loaded my limp body onto a stretcher as they wheeled me out of the expensive penthouse I had paid for. I closed my eyes and let my breathing grow shallow. The official medical report clearly stated that I had suddenly suffered an irreversible neurological collapse due to the advanced stage of my presumed leukemia. According to the medical charts, my organs were shutting down and I had slipped into a deep, permanent coma. Dr. Eris formally transferred me to an exclusive, secure palliative care wing at a private facility on the outskirts of New York. It was a place designed for the ultra-wealthy to quietly slip away. The security was, biometric scanners locked every door and a dedicated team of private nurses, all personally selected by Dr. Eris guarded my suite. Officially, my prognosis was grim. I was given less than a week to live. The hospital administration immediately notified Julian of my critical transfer, updating him on my comatose state. I knew the tragic news would act as a starter pistol for his final phase of greed. He would assume the finish line was in sight. He would believe that his agonizing wait was finally over, that the ultimate political prize was securely within his grasp. He had played the long game, feeding me poison drop by drop, and now he was ready to reap the unholy rewards of his sinister labor. Inside my secure hospital suite, the reality was different. The room was spacious, filled with natural light, and devoid of the usual beeping hospital machinery. Instead of lying comatose on a ventilator, I was sitting up in a plush armchair, sipping purified water, and receiving round-the-clock chelation therapy. Nurse Clara remained by my side, administering the rigorous medical treatments that were actively pulling the heavy metals from my bone marrow. My strength was returning with a fierce, undeniable momentum. The agonizing joint pain began to recede, and the deep, suffocating fatigue melted away, leaving behind a sharp, lethal mental clarity. To maintain control over the situation, I had one of my most trusted corporate security technicians covertly install hidden cameras and audio feeds directly inside my hospital suite and at the nurse's station outside my heavy door. If Julian or Eleanor decided to make a surprise visit to play the role of the grieving family for the press, I needed to be prepared to jump into the hospital bed and feign unconsciousness. But the cameras revealed a much colder, darker truth. I sat in my secure room, a blanket draped over my lap, watching the live security feed on my encrypted tablet. Days passed, the hallway outside my door remained empty. Julian never came, Eleanor never came. Arthur never stopped by to check on the woman who had generously handed him a career. They did not send flowers. They did not send cards. They did not even bother to make an appearance for the sake of the hospital staff. Instead, they called. I listened to the audio recordings of their daily check-ins with the front desk. Julian would call every morning at 9 o'clock. He sounded upbeat, almost cheerful, lacking the somber tone of a husband whose young wife was clinging to life. Yes, this is Julian calling for an update on Serena. Has there been any change in her status? Has her heart stopped yet? He asked the question with the casual indifference of someone inquiring about a delayed package. There was no tremor in his voice, no hesitation, just a cold, calculating demand for a time of death. Eleanor called in the afternoons. I listened as she interrogated the nurses, demanding to know why my body was taking so long to fail. She complained about the severe inconvenience of the waiting period, loudly proclaiming that her gubernatorial campaign launch needed the sympathetic boost of a grieving son, and I was selfishly holding up the political schedule. Hearing their voices stripped of all pretense did not break my heart. It hardened it into diamond. Any lingering trace of mercy I might have harbored for the man I married vanished. They were monsters feeding on my resources, anticipating my funeral so they could dance on my grave. I slowly turned off the audio feed, a chilling calm settling over my mind. They wanted a dead woman. I was going to give them a resurrected queen armed with a guillotine. With my physical health rapidly improving, it was time to build my arsenal. I could not rely on standard police channels. Julian was politically connected, and Arthur was a shrewd accountant. They knew how to hide behind corporate loopholes and manipulate the legal system. I needed professionals who operated at the highest level of federal law enforcement and private intelligence. I needed people who could track the digital ghosts of my stolen money and build a criminal case so airtight that Julian and Arthur would never see the outside of a federal penitentiary. From the quiet sanctuary of my hospital room, I used a secure, untraceable satellite phone to contact Marcus, my private banker. I bypassed the frozen corporate accounts and authorized him to access a hidden, untouchable offshore trust fund I had established years ago. Before I even met Julian, it was my ultimate failsafe, a reserve of capital disconnected from Zenith Trading Capital. With those funds, I hired Elias Vance, a legendary private investigator renowned in New York for dismantling corrupt corporate empires and exposing dirty politicians. Elias was a former intelligence officer who specialized in forensic accounting and digital espionage. I arranged a classified, secure video conference with him. I sat in my hospital suite, looking directly into the camera, and laid out the conspiracy. I sent him the encrypted files containing Arthur's dummy shell companies, the offshore routing numbers, and the dark money super PACs registered under Eleanor's name. Elias did not ask unnecessary questions. He saw the data, recognized the magnitude of the theft, and immediately went to work. His objective was simple yet complex in its execution. He was to physically track every single asset, identify every dummy corporation Arthur had established, and trace the exact flow of the synthetic thallium and arsenic. I needed to know how Julian acquired the rare poison. I needed the dark web receipts, the encrypted emails, the shipping manifests. I needed the smoking gun that would transform this from a complex financial fraud case into a slam-dunk federal conviction for attempted premeditated murder. But Elias was only the first half of the equation. Private investigators gather the ammunition, but the federal government pulls the trigger. I reached out to Special Agent Davis, a veteran operative within the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who specialized in high-level political corruption and corporate embezzlement. Agent Davis had previously consulted with my firm on an interstate data theft years ago, and we had maintained a strong mutual respect ever since that successful operation. I knew he was relentless, incorruptible, and despised white-collar criminals who preyed on legitimate businesses with impunity. He viewed political predators as a cancer on society, and I was about to hand him the ultimate malignant tumor. Contacting the FBI while officially declared comatose required extreme delicacy. I coordinated a secure encrypted drop file, delivering the preliminary evidence of Arthur's wire fraud directly to Agent Davis's private federal server. I included a voice memo, my tone calm and devoid of fear, explaining the poisoning, the frozen accounts, and the political laundering scheme. I told him I was alive, recovering in secret, and ready to hand the FBI the biggest domestic political fraud case of the decade. Agent Davis responded within the hour via an encrypted messaging channel. He confirmed receipt of the files and indicated that the sheer volume of the interstate wire transfers Arthur had executed triggered immediate federal jurisdiction. The FBI was officially opening a covert high-priority investigation into Julian Arthur and Eleanor's campaign. Agent Davis assured me that a specialized federal task force was being assembled to quietly monitor all of Julian's incoming and outgoing communications, track his cryptocurrency movements, and freeze his shadow campaign assets the second we sprang the trap. I sat back in my chair, looking out the large window of my hospital suite at the sprawling city skyline. The chelating fluid continued its steady life-saving drip into my arm. My body was healing, shedding the poison that was meant to bury me. My mind was sharp, focused on the intricate, beautiful mathematics of vengeance. Julian and his family were currently celebrating in my expansive penthouse, unaware that an invisible federal net was rapidly tightening around their throats. They thought they had successfully executed a brilliant, flawless scheme to seize my empire. They had no idea that the empire was striking back. I was a lethal ghost, hovering just out of their immediate sight, systematically placing the invisible dynamite directly under their feet. The trap was set, the federal agents were watching, and the private investigators were hunting. All I had to do was wait patiently in the shadows for them to make their final fatal mistake. I did not have to wait long. The silence of my hospital room was shattered only by the soft hum of the air filtration system as I reached for my secondary encrypted tablet. Long before the heavy metals had begun to destroy my physical body, I had sensed a subtle, inexplicable shift in the atmosphere of my own home. Call it female intuition, or the hyper-vigilant paranoia of a seasoned trading executive. But 6 months ago, I had quietly hired a discreet security firm to install a network of microscopic high-definition smart home cameras throughout my penthouse. They were embedded in the crown molding, hidden inside the intricate ventilation grates, and concealed within the custom light fixtures I had personally selected. Julian had no idea they existed. I tapped the secure application icon on my screen, entered my biometric passcode, and instantly brought up the live feeds from my house. The crystal-clear resolution beamed directly into my sterile sanctuary, offering a voyeuristic window into the home I had paid for with my own blood and sweat. I cycled through the exterior cameras first. Everything appeared normal. The private elevator lobby was empty. I switched the feed to the interior, tapping the icon for the master bedroom. It was my sacred space, decorated in soft creams and rich gold accents, a room I had meticulously designed as a refuge from the crushing demands of my corporate life. The screen flickered for a fraction of a second before stabilizing. My breath caught sharply in my throat, and a sickening wave of revulsion washed over me. Julian was not alone. He was strolling confidently into our bedroom, laughing loudly, his arm wrapped casually around the waist of a young blonde woman. I zoomed in, enhancing the facial recognition feed on my tablet. The blood roared in my ears as her identity registered. It was Chloe. Chloe was 25 years old, a young woman known throughout political circles as Eleanor's brilliant, innocent campaign manager. She was the picture of untouched virtue, always wearing modest designer dresses and standing dutifully behind Eleanor at every press conference, nodding with wide-eyed devotion. Eleanor frequently paraded her around wealthy donors, loudly praising her pristine morals and deep devotion to the political cause. Seeing her standing in the center of my master bedroom was a staggering shock, but it was nothing compared to the violent blow that came next. As Chloe turned to place her designer handbag on my custom vanity, the fabric of her silk blouse pulled tightly across her torso. She was undeniably, visibly pregnant, judging by the distinct roundness of her stomach. She was easily 5 months along. The sheer mathematics of the betrayal hit me like a physical punch to the chest. 5 months Julian had been sleeping, with this supposedly innocent campaign manager in my bed. Establishing a brand new political family right around the exact same time, he began slipping synthetic thallium into my morning IV drips. He was not just trying to steal my hard-earned fortune to fund his mother's campaign. He was actively clearing out his current life to make room for his new younger replacement. He was replacing me with a woman hand-picked from his mother's elite political inner circle. I watched in disgust as Julian pulled Chloe close, kissing her right there on the edge of the mattress I had purchased. He rubbed her swelling belly with a sickening display of affection, a look of profound pride plastered across his face. It was a look he had never, not once, given me during our marriage. I squeezed the edge of my tablet so hard, my knuckles turned white, fighting the sudden violent urge to hurl the device across the hospital room. They were desecrating my home, parading their illicit, treacherous affair in the place I was supposed to feel safest. But the horror show was far from over. A notification pinged on my screen, indicating motion in the formal dining room downstairs. I quickly toggled the camera feed. Eleanor had arrived. My mother-in-law strutted into my penthouse as if she possessed the grand deed to the estate, carrying a folder of campaign analytics and shouting for Julian and Chloe to hurry downstairs. She looked vibrant, celebratory, and devoid of any grief for her supposedly dying daughter-in-law. I activated the high-fidelity audio feed, the ambient sounds of my own dining room filtering directly into my earpiece. Julian and Chloe bounded down the grand staircase, laughing like two careless teenagers. Eleanor greeted them with open arms, pulling Chloe into a deep theatrical embrace. They settled around the oak dining table, the table where I had hosted countless high-stakes networking dinners, serving these exact same people who were now plotting my demise. I increased the volume on my tablet, catching every single treacherous syllable that fell from their lips. Eleanor reached across the polished wood and placed both of her hands squarely on Chloe's pregnant belly, her aristocratic face practically glowing with sheer unadulterated ecstasy. "Oh, it is simply perfect," Eleanor declared, her refined voice ringing out with that familiar booming political cadence. "Everything is falling into place flawlessly. Look at this beautiful, blessed air growing right here. My future grandson." Chloe giggled softly, leaning into Julian's shoulder as he poured them all generous glasses of my most expensive imported champagne. "I just cannot believe how everything is working out," Chloe murmured, sipping the champagne without a single care for the child growing inside her. "It feels like a dream, Senator. Julian and I have been waiting for this exact moment for so long." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively, an ugly triumphant twisting her aristocratic features. "The political landscape always rewards the bold, my sweet girl. We just needed to clear out the unpleasant dead weight, so Julian could step into his true power." "Julian," Eleanor continued, tapping a thick stack of printed financial documents. "Arthur confirmed that the final offshore transfer cleared this morning. We now have $12 million secured in our untraceable dark money PACs. And the life insurance company has pre-approved the $20 million payout pending the final death certificate. We are going to launch the gubernatorial campaign with a financial war chest, so that no opponent will even dare to challenge us." Julian raised his champagne flute, a dark, smug smile spreading across his handsome face. "To Serena," he mocked, clinking his glass against Chloe's. "For being such a generous, naive wife, her sacrifice will not be forgotten. We'll even name a small public park after her when you win the governor's seat. Mother, The three of them threw their heads back and laughed. It was a cold, chilling sound that echoed through the empty halls of my home. I carefully shut off the tablet and handed it to Nurse Clara. The final piece of the puzzle had firmly locked into place. I had everything I needed: the financial records, the audio confessions, the proof of the affair. It was time to pull the trigger. The next morning, at 8 a.m., Dr. Eris made the official phone call. I sat quietly in my chair as she dialed Julian's number on speakerphone. "Mr. Vance," Dr. Eris said, her voice dropping into a flawless performance of grave professional sympathy. "I am so sorry to inform you. Serena passed away peacefully this morning. The neurological collapse was irreversible." I could practically hear the sigh of relief on the other end of the line. Julian paused for a fraction of a second, attempting to inject a slight pathetic tremor into his voice. I understand, doctor. Thank you for doing everything you could. I will contact the funeral home immediately." "Take all the time you need, Mr. Vance," she replied before hanging up. Within 48 hours, Eleanor Vance's gubernatorial campaign officially launched. She rented out the grand ballroom of the most prestigious luxury hotel in Manhattan for a publicized fundraising gala. The event was broadcast live on local news networks, attended by the city's political elite, wealthy donors, and the relentless press. Julian, dressed in a sharp black suit and wearing a somber black tie, was scheduled to give the keynote speech. He was going to use his tragic status as a grieving young widower to generate political sympathy, officially launching the Serena Vance Memorial Foundation to funnel even more illegal donations into their dark money accounts. He thought he was walking into his ultimate political coronation. He had no idea he was walking straight into an FBI ambush. At 7:30 p.m., the grand ballroom was packed to capacity. The crystal chandeliers gleamed brightly, illuminating the hundreds of wealthy donors, mingling in expensive tuxedos and designer gowns. Eleanor stood at the front of the room, beaming brightly as she shook hands and accepted campaign checks. I arrived at the hotel in a convoy of unmarked black federal SUVs. I did not wear a hospital gown. I did not look like a frail, dying woman. I wore a stunning, custom-tailored emerald green designer gown, my hair flawlessly styled, and expensive diamond studs resting in my ears. I looked like undeniable, devastating corporate power. Special Agent Davis walked beside me, flanked by a dozen armed federal agents in tactical gear. They moved with silent, lethal precision, locking down all the exits to the grand ballroom before anyone inside even realized what was happening. On the bright stage, Julian was standing behind a glass podium, looking out at the crowd with a practiced expression of deep sorrow. Chloe stood quietly in the front row, wiping fake tears from her eyes. "My beautiful wife, Serena, was a brilliant light in this world," Julian said into the microphone, his voice echoing off the high-vaulted ceilings. "Her sudden tragic passing has left a void in my heart that can never be filled. But we must turn our profound grief into political action. Tonight, in her honor, my mother and I are launching." He never finished the sentence. I pushed through the double doors at the back of the ballroom and walked straight down the center aisle, the heavy staccato click of my expensive heels echoing loudly over the sudden shocked silence of the crowd. Heads began to turn, whispers rapidly spread through the expensive tables as the political elite recognized the supposedly dead woman marching toward the stage. When Julian's eyes landed on me, his fake pious expression instantly vanished. The microphone slipped from his trembling hands and crashed onto the wooden stage with a deafening screech of feedback. His face drained of all living color. He looked like he had literally seen a ghost. Eleanor, standing just off stage, clutched her chest, performing a dramatic gasp of terror. Chloe stepped back, clutching her pregnant belly, her eyes wide with shock. I did not stop at the front row. I walked straight up the carpeted stairs and onto the bright stage, picking up the microphone Julian had dropped. "Julian," I said, my voice projecting clearly into the room, silencing the hundreds of shocked attendees. "Did you honestly think you could slowly poison me with synthetic thallium? Use your cousin Arthur to embezzle $12 million from my high-frequency trading firm. And fund your mother's gubernatorial campaign without facing the consequences. The collective gasp from the crowd was deafening. The news cameras in the back of the room instantly swiveled, zooming in on my face, broadcasting the confrontation live across the state. She's having a psychotic break," Julian shouted, his voice cracking with unadulterated terror. "The leukemia has spread to her brain. Security, get her off this stage." "I don't have leukemia, Julian," I announced. "And I am definitely not dead. In fact, as of this morning, my team of private investigators handed over a mountain of irrefutable evidence to the federal government. Evidence that proves you actively purchased illegal toxins on the dark web. Evidence that proves Arthur funneled my corporate profits into Eleanor's illegal super PACs." I turned to the crowd of wealthy donors, pointing directly at the terrified mother and son. "They are not political saviors, they are ruthless, cold-blooded financial predators who orchestrated a money-laundering scheme and attempted premeditated murder to steal my empire." Eleanor lunged forward, her aristocratic facade shattered. "Turn off the cameras. This is a malicious lie designed to ruin my campaign." "The only thing ruined here is your life, Eleanor," I replied coldly, turning my gaze to the front row. "And as for you, Chloe, I hope the $12 million Julian promised you to start your new family was worth the federal accessory charges." Before Julian could even sputter a pathetic response or attempt to flee, Special Agent Davis marched straight onto the stage, holding a stack of federal arrest warrants. The armed agents swarmed the ballroom, swiftly detaining Arthur near the exit doors. "Julian Vance, Eleanor Vance, and Arthur Vance," Special Agent Davis announced loudly, his voice cutting through the shocked silence of the gala. "You are all under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated corporate embezzlement, illegal campaign finance violations, and the attempted premeditated murder of Serena Vance." Julian's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the polished wooden stage, weeping pathetically and begging for mercy as the federal agents slapped heavy metal handcuffs onto his wrists. The confident, handsome political rising star was gone, replaced by a terrified, sobbing criminal. Eleanor screamed hysterically, fighting the federal agents as they forcefully restrained her, her expensive designer gown tearing in the struggle. Her pristine political career was over, obliterated on live television. Chloe stood frozen in the front row, sobbing uncontrollably as agents read her Miranda rights, realizing her comfortable future had just vanished into thin air. I stood on the stage, watching the chaotic, satisfying scene unfold. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. They had tried to bury me, they had tried to steal everything I had built, but I was the supreme architect. I had built the digital walls, and I had just crushed them underneath the rubble. I turned my back on my toxic, ruined former family and walked confidently down the stairs of the stage. The heavy applause from the shocked crowd began slowly, then erupted into a deafening roar of undeniable respect. I walked out of the hotel doors and into the bright, glorious Manhattan night, stepping into my waiting sleek Blacktown car. I was no longer the silent, supportive, dying wife. I was the apex predator, and I had just won the game.